I would like to introduce our CEO, Jeff Green, and I'll bring him on and let him take it away and get us started.
Thank you so much, Robert. I've never thought about it. Is there such a thing as a quorum for a webinar? But maybe this morning the answer is yes. I really appreciate it. I see hundreds of folks from across the state and nation, as Robert said, joining us. So thank you for being here, nonprofit leaders and allies, and just interested parties as well. We're delighted to have you with us. As Robert said, we have a jam-packed agenda for you today, and we're going to take on one of the biggest questions that I know has haunted many since the beginning of the current federal administration, and that is this question around language, really language policing, and starting with the DEI orders, all of the barrage of executive orders and what they mean for nonprofits and how they do their work, how they communicate, and so forth. So we're going to start moving through some slides just to set this up before I introduce our panelists. For those of you new to Cal Nonprofits, I will simply share we are a policy alliance representing over 10,000 organizations. We are a membership organization as well, and we really do three primary things. We do policy and advocacy work on behalf of the nonprofit sector, often at a structural level, working on those things that cut across all of our different subsectors in the nonprofit world. We do education like this right here, talking about how policy impacts the field, what it means on the ground in community, and what we can do as far as accessing resources to do our work stronger and better. And then data and research, when we find excellent data, we push it out into the sector. And when we see gaps, we do the research ourselves. And right now we're in the midst of an updated causes count, if you're familiar with that report, talking about the economic and political power of the sector, which really is what we're here to do, is to build a more powerful and politically engaged nonprofit sector across California. So thank you all for being part of it. You are welcome to check out, if you're not a Cal Nonprofits member, get on our email list, maybe join up. It's all there for you on our website. All right, we're going to move on now to talk about today. So today we've called this a new McCarthyism. Obviously, this is a metaphor with some serious weight behind it and some serious history. It is probably not a perfect metaphor for what we're seeing at the moment, but it's certainly Senator Joseph McCarthy and his efforts in the 1950s were probably the closest touchstone to what we're feeling today for many people. Whether or not you lived through it or remember it, or studied it in history class, or in some cases I realize may not have heard this before. This was really the push in the post-World War II era, the Red Scare, the naming of names, the outing of people seen as dangerous to the country because they were leftist or progressive or quote-unquote communist, sometimes really, sometimes not. But there was a huge wave of this. It would also happen after World War I. And so we thought this was an appropriate metaphor for the moment, as we have an administration that is now targeting certain organizations based on their ideologies, their beliefs, the words they use. And of course, that's a new thing for many nonprofits, and it's important to take a moment to say, here's what we're really dealing with, and here are some tools to do it. And that's who we've invited today, is some fabulous thinkers, leaders, and speakers to talk about how we might do this. So moving through, I just want to share some of the landscape. As of this morning, I actually had to check this within the hour, we are at 157 executive orders coming from the federal administration as of today. They were published as of today. I think it was 152 as of last night, and then you had to look again. That is the speed at which this is happening. Some of these are incredibly relevant for our work, others are not. But this is really the context in which we started to schedule and craft these webinars to support our colleagues and allies across the nonprofit sector. Next slide, please. If you look at those executive orders, this is the one that probably set off the first alarm bells on day one. So this is Executive Order 14151. It was, I believe, the fifth one signed by the president. And this is where DEI got called out in print as a target. This is, of course, something that was part of the campaign in advance. So we all had heard the rhetoric, and we knew to some extent what was coming. But this is really the one that, and it was not the only one, it was simply the first in the barrage of those 157 and counting executive orders that said something about eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and calling them illegal, immoral. You can see the text right here. And this is the beginning of what we have seen over these last 4 months. Let's go on to the next one. Now, I think one of the challenges is that this is coming so fast and there are so many, and most people don't hang out on the Federal Register reading executive orders, and I praise you for that. I don't know what I've become lately, but nonetheless, we do have some fabulous allies with the National Council of Nonprofits, and I just want to highlight this resource. Starting on the 21st of January, they began decoding these and trying to offer resources to the sector about what these all might actually mean. It includes lawsuits challenging them, the status in the courts, all of the various things. So that link there is live. We'll also put it in the chat for you, and it is constantly updated. This is just a screenshot from last night about how it looks now. So please use this. Next slide. This was then the second, just a week later, when we think about language and how it's being used. This was the OMB memo about freezing funding, and of course, this is something that everyone reacted to as well. And you can see here in the pullout quote, non-governmental organizations, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. So that, again, these phrases that had largely been sort of tossed around in political campaigning started to take on the form of policy, or at least guidance, coming from the White House. And this is again where it becomes difficult for nonprofits to decode what actually does this mean for my work. Let's go to the next slide. So it's been very difficult in the short time we've had to try to quantify what's actually happening versus what's just being said out loud, what's a signal and a message being sent, and what's actually a policy or a change of funding or other law in some cases. This is one that I want to highlight. Center for American Progress has been compiling this. This is a DOGE realities on the ground by congressional district, and it shows how many cuts have been made, how many things have been frozen or revoked. If you click on any of those on the live site, again, link at the bottom, you will see exactly what's happened in your home territory. But this is just one of those tools, again, working quickly to try to get a handle on what's real on the ground. So language starts to have a real impact here when it comes to funding and fiscal reality of the sector. Let's go to the next slide. Another thing that we've seen that's really, I don't know that it's unprecedented, but can't remember seeing this before, but this is the website screenshot from the US Senate Committee on Appropriations, and the minorities in the both houses have put this together to try to track, using an Airtable, the real-time cuts and freezes of grants. And you can see that number at the left of over 430 billion. So this is actually on the US Senate Committee on Appropriations website, and it's in a searchable database that you can use to find out what's just being talked about and what's becoming real. So that's just a snapshot of what we're seeing, and we think it's important at a moment like this to talk through what's real. So I want to then bring it to the state level, the next couple of slides, and just show you what we've been doing in our work as Count Nonprofits. Really two strategies at a state level. The first, if you look at what our Attorney General has done, next slide, you see that this is not new, of course. Our AG's office has been active through several administrations about taking action on behalf of protecting the state of California. And so when it came to the DEI work, specifically targeting schools and school funding, Attorney General did file suit and join in other suits as well. But you can see there are legal strategies in the state of California trying to protect our work on what is absolutely legal diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and try to push back against some of these messages coming from the federal administration. On a policy side, next slide, we're also working on a couple of strategies, but one I just want to call out for you. This is a bill, Assembly Bill 1318, authored and carried by Assemblymember Bonta, and we are the sponsor of this bill. And the idea here is that we are trying to find ways to protect nonprofits in California as the federal government continues to target them at a federal level. So if, for example, the things threatened in HR 9495, or again in the early reconciliation bill drafts have now been stripped out, where it would empower the executive branch to simply unilaterally strip nonprofit status, 501c3 status, we may find ways to protect it at a state level. So these are just things to be aware of as we think through strategies to protect the work, to build the work, and to keep going through this very tumultuous period. So let's go just one more slide here before I bring on our speakers. This is what we're going to try to address today, is some questions. And some of these seem very basic. Some folks may have engaged in this work for many, many years, and they are used to sort of policy debates. But this is a different time. So we think it's right and fair and needed to talk about, can we still pursue our mission? You know, is there something happening at the federal level that actually makes what we're doing undoable, illegal, problematic, unfundable? And we want to get really clear on what really has and hasn't changed. Then we want to talk about language, because a lot of this is based in messaging and language. And should we change our language? Do we scrub our website? Those are things that we're seeing some organizations choose to do. Many choose not to. I think where we stand, and I think it's fair to say this out loud here at the top of the webinar, is we encourage people to push back and continue to pursue their very legitimate and important and critical work. But there are times and places where agencies that are more vulnerable may choose to change how they speak about their work in the interest of continuing to do it. And there are others that are in a position of greater relative privilege and power, and we encourage them to please stand up and push back. So the particular role that you choose to play, I think we want to make sure we don't judge each other so harshly, but that we do what we can, and dependent on our position of power and privilege as an organization, what can we do to protect the work of all of our allies in this moment. We'll talk about what in the law has and hasn't actually changed. And we'll talk about what we can do to continue to protect our communities. Specifically, we're also going to hear from a funder, who I'm going to introduce you to momentarily. What specific role can funders play? With respect to having some power and privilege, funders certainly have that with resources and some insulation from some of these things. Not entirely, certainly, but what could a funder choose to do strategically to partner and support this work in this moment? And what can we actually do on the other side of the scale to build power in this moment and use this challenge to build stronger coalitions, to build stronger advocacy? We think that's certainly already happening. And how can we do that work? Now, of course, we're going to end on communication, since a lot of this is about that. And we have a fabulous presenter today to talk about really strategic communications in times of crisis. So that's just some of what we're going to do today. And I'm now happy to introduce you to the panel, put myself on mute. But we're going to ask them to come on briefly, and this is the order in which you will hear from them. Ritu Mahajan Estes, who is the directing attorney with Public Counsel, a fabulous, long-standing advocate in the nonprofit sector, for the nonprofit sector, and of the nonprofit sector. We want to welcome Ritu. Secondly, we will have Crystal Crawford, who is the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Weingart Foundation, and talking specifically about what I just mentioned, which is the role that funders may play in this moment, and how they're thinking through the challenges coming at all of us. And finally, we will end with Felix Shein, who is the president at Rally, a fabulous communications firm, strategist, advocate, and so forth, working with many nonprofits and others about how do you navigate this as you speak about, think about, communicate about your work. So I want to thank you all. Thank you for being here. And I will now mute myself and hand the mic, such as it is, to Ritu. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm having trouble turning on my camera. It says it's disabled by the host. Okay, let me see. I think it's gonna work now. Yes. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. As Jeff said, my name is Ritu Mahajan Estes. I'm with Public Counsel. For those of you that aren't familiar with Public Counsel, we are a legal nonprofit and civil rights organization located in Los Angeles. And very happy to be here today. Next slide, please. Just to share a little bit more about the project that I lead at Public Counsel, our project provides free legal assistance to low-income entrepreneurs as well as nonprofits that share our mission of serving low-income communities and addressing issues of poverty within LA County. Next slide, please. Public Counsel is part of a coalition of civil rights organizations offering strategic resources and legal assistance to help California nonprofit organizations navigate the legal landscape following the Supreme Court's Students for Fair Admissions case, as well as the January 2025 DEI executive orders. I'm stating this here because if any of your nonprofits that are in California need legal assistance, to navigate what's happening right now, there are free resources, including Public Counsel, as well as the Lawyers Committee, which is in San Francisco. And at the end, I'll share information on how you can apply for our services. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just start with, grounding us on this issue, because we've been hearing, of course, a lot these days about the word DEI. And I want us to all remember what this phrase actually means and what the purpose is behind it. So DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, also we sometimes hear it as DEI-AB, including accessibility and belonging, is really a shorthand for a range of initiatives aimed at addressing deep-rooted biases and stereotypes. These initiatives are intended to foster diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments in workplaces, social settings, and educational institutions. While they're often referred to as a single concept that means the same thing, in reality, they represent distinct ideas with unique goals and approaches. Diversity refers to the presence of differences within a given setting, including race, gender, age, and more. Equity involves the fair treatment, access, and opportunities for all, while inclusion is creating a culture where everyone feels respected and valued. These are organizational and institutional frameworks that really aim to ensure fair treatment and full participation for everyone, especially those from underrepresented groups or those that have faced discrimination due to their identity or protected characteristics. Our country's history with racial equity programming goes back to the Reconstruction era. And now we're of course seeing a lot more attacks on DEI. These attacks are primarily stemming from the equity aspect of the equation, largely due to conservative backlash regarding perceived unfairness and the belief that these DEI initiatives undermine merit-based systems. Anti-Black racism, misogyny, transphobia, and xenophobia are the primary drivers behind efforts to roll back years of advancement for historically marginalized groups. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Public Counsel is a civil rights organization in Los Angeles. We've actually provided free legal services to community-based nonprofits since the 1970s. And for the past year and a half, we have really deepened our understanding of the legal issues affecting nonprofits that are engaged in racial equity programming in light of the escalating conservative legal activism. We've, through this work, identified several key areas that organizations must understand to evaluate and manage their risks effectively. And I'm going to be spending the next few slides really helping to familiarize ourselves with the current climate that nonprofits that are advancing racial and economic justice are experiencing, including providing a review of state and federal civil rights laws that we all should be aware of, and helping nonprofits to make empowered and informed choices. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the basic state and federal civil rights laws that apply to DEI programs. So we have the Equal Protection and Due Process Clause. So, this really requires that each state provides equal protection under the law to all people. We have Section 1981, which protects against racial discrimination in contracting. We have Title VI, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. For programs receiving federal funding. We have Title VII, which prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. And then we have two California laws, the UNRRA Act, which protects California residents from discrimination, and it applies normally to businesses, but it can also apply to nonprofit organizations depending on the situation. And then we also have FEHA, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, which is a comprehensive set of laws that prohibits discrimination and harassment. Next slide, please. Okay. So now I'm going to just quickly go over the legal landscape before we saw the executive orders on DEI coming out in January. So over the past few years, there are several key cases that had significantly altered the landscape of DEI. There's first the Students for Fair Admissions case from 2023, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Basically, in June 2023, the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admissions. They ruled that race-conscious admissions were unconstitutional because race was no longer being regarded as a positive factor, and admission rates for certain groups were being adversely affected. While the court did decide that race could not be used as an explicit factor in making college admission decisions, The court did say that an applicant's discussion of their experience in life circumstances, including with race, was permissible. This decision significantly altered the landscape of college admissions and, basically requires institutions to seek alternative ways to achieve diversity. So that was the SFFA decision. And then in 2024, we had the Fearless Fund case. So again, many of you may have heard about this case. This case involved legal challenges to programs designed to fund and support businesses owned by women of color. Essentially, the plaintiffs argued that the program was only benefiting Black women and therefore violated Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act. The case was settled by the defendant, who ended up terminating its grant program, which was for Black women-owned businesses. And they made some changes to their website and public-facing material, but just wanted to note that their grant program was already set to end, and that the result in this case, which, as I mentioned, was through settlement, does not mean that DEI programming is unlawful, and it does not indicate how successful a lawsuit of this kind would be in California, because this case took place in Atlanta. And I just wanted to quickly note that in California, which is where a lot of our nonprofits may be situated, it is the case that our robust civil rights laws are being used to challenge and potentially dismantle programs aimed at promoting DEI. We're seeing this occur through lawsuits that have been brought by private individuals, as well as now, of course, the actions that the administration is taking. Next slide, please. So I know Jeff already alluded to the DEI executive orders, so I'm not going to go into them in detail. But as you know, there's been orders coming out since day one. And these orders do impact organizations that participate in DEI initiatives, of course, and they impact these organizations regardless of whether or not they receive federal funding. And I just also want to know, as many of you know, that nowhere in the orders is DEI actually defined, nor is it clear from the orders what illegal DEI is supposed to mean. And so, again, just pointing that out, and as many of you know, that these executive orders have been challenged in court, and many are being struck down by judges based on viewpoint discrimination and lack of due process. So basically, the judges that are hearing the cases on these orders are saying that the administration has violated the First and Fifth Amendment by punishing people that have certain viewpoints and finding that these orders are unlawful. So again, as we're seeing, the administration is targeting DEI initiatives. So far, they've seemed to be going after, large universities, large companies, large law firms, trying to, basically make a point and get headlines and sort of instill fear in the community. And I really am here today to point out that the orders do not change long-standing civil rights laws that we've had on the book for decades. Nonprofits do have a right and can continue to discuss the effects of discrimination and express their commitment to DEI. The First Amendment protects this type of speech. But, legal issues may arise depending on how nonprofits are implementing their DEI initiatives. So I highly recommend that your nonprofit, evaluate its programs and policies, assess any risks that, they may pose, and determine your organization's risk tolerance, right? Every organization is going to have its own tolerance for risk based on a variety of factors, and then make informed decisions about whether to modify any of your policies and practices. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, just briefly, I wanted to share what we've been seeing at Public Counsel in terms of people calling us about funding freezes or termination of their federal funding. Some orgs that receive grants, from the previous administration to do certain work that's related to equity are now being told that, you can't do that work, you're going to be punished for doing that work. we've seen, nonprofits being asked to certify that they're not engaged in unlawful DEI. We've also seen censorship, right? And basically some nonprofits deciding that they need to scrub their websites and remove any mention of DEI out of fear that if those types of words remain on public-facing material, it'll make them a target. Next slide, please. So, what does all this really mean for nonprofits that are advancing equity? Again, effective DEI practices that support equal opportunity, combat biases, and promote inclusion remain lawful. And they actually help to ensure legal compliance. They help to ensure that we're not violating our civil rights laws. The DEI executive orders do not change longstanding federal and state civil rights laws, and nonprofits may continue to express their commitment to DEI as the speech is protected by the First Amendment. As I mentioned, legal issues may arise depending on how you are carrying out your DEI initiatives, and it's really important that each nonprofit, try to understand the laws that are applicable to your programs, familiarize yourself with the evolving landscape, and assess how to continue fulfilling your mission and charitable purpose in this climate. And Public Counsel is, here to help you in these things. Next slide, please. So, some things that we're recommending that organizations do at this time is really sit down and hopefully with the advice of a lawyer, if you can have access to one, assess the risk that any of their programs pose, and really think about whether there's steps that can be taken to mitigate risk, or whether the organization wants to take the risk head on and continue leaning into its programs and services. And again, as we keep mentioning, each organization is going to have to make those decisions for themselves. For those that are engaged in DEI work and want to stay the course, we recommend that you do a risk assessment, have a lawyer help you look through your programs and services against state and federal civil rights laws. Also, make sure that you're doing what needs to be done to maintain your tax exemption. And I'll talk about that in a bit. And so on state and federal civil rights laws, I wanted to mention that even before the recent executive orders were issued, all California employers, for example, were required to comply with state and federal anti-discrimination laws. And under this new administration, what we're likely to see, and we have seen, is the federal government may be more likely to scrutinize private sector employment practices. So again, on that front, you want to make sure that when you're hiring, you're focusing on skill set, capabilities. You're not using quotas or preferences based on protected categories. Of course, you can seek employees that their work aligns with your mission, and you can even still ask how race or their lived experience has impacted their life. But you don't want to be making hiring decisions based on protected categories. And you can still track applicants' demographic information to understand, the effects of your hiring practices, and you don't need to eliminate all DEI considerations from your hiring practices. Next slide, please. We're also recommending that in your programs and services, just, again, it's okay, and it's still, I understand and want to encourage you all to continue adhering to your missions and talking about why your work to address discrimination is important, and why you focus your work on certain communities. All of that is still lawful, but in the execution of your services, to the extent possible, you want to try to make your services open to everyone. If you limit your services to people of a certain racial group or gender, for example, it's possible that, a claim could be brought that you are then violating civil rights laws by discriminating against others by not giving them access to your services. So I've had clients, their websites may say that they focus on, Asian American immigrants, and it's fine to say that, and they talk about their services, but it may help to include language that explains that your services are open to anybody, right? And actually have that be a practice that you follow. Next slide, please. Again, if you're going to be giving out funding through a fellowship or grant, because what we saw in the Fearless Fund case, you want to make sure you're not making it seem like it's a contract. You can provide unconditional gifts. Instead, as I mentioned, if you do have programming that's open to all, you want to make that explicit. You want to the extent possible, not have programming that's just limited to certain groups. We can definitely give you more one-on-one advice on that and how to navigate that if your programming is limited to certain groups. And again, you might decide that I know that what I'm doing is risky, but I'm going to go ahead and continue doing it, and I see the value in that too. So as I mentioned, each organization needs to kind of decide for themselves how they're going to proceed. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to close because I know we have some wonderful speakers that are going after me, and I want to make sure there's enough time for them. That programs that advance and promote racial and gender justice really, as you all know, help to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, has equal access to opportunities, feels valued, and can contribute their unique perspectives. Public counsel like Cal Nonprofits is really urging nonprofits to not withdraw from their critical work in this moment, to maintain a focus on achieving racial and gender equity, as it's really even more important now than ever. And I really encourage you not to overcorrect, not to engage in pre-obedience. This is exactly what the administration wants us to do. And playing it safe is really not a strategy that works in the long term, that's effective in the long term. And it will really erode any and all social progress we've made. And if any of your nonprofits need legal advice, you're in California, you want to have a risk assessment done, or just, to talk to someone for an hour on Zoom about your programs, please reach out to public counsel. As I mentioned, we do offer free legal services, and I'll put our information in the chat. Thank you. And I think we're turning it now to Crystal.
Yes, thank you so much, Ritu. That was helpful, and your closing was such a good segue to kind of what I want to say from the funder world. As some of you may know, I'm Crystal Crawford with the Weingart Foundation. This is my second stint in philanthropy. Most recently, I was serving as the executive director of Western Center on Law and Poverty, and had to join philanthropy when I had the opportunity to come on board at the Weingart Foundation as our senior director of strategic partnerships under the leadership of our new CEO, who's about to celebrate a year in her position, Joanna Jackson. And part of the reason that I had to say yes to this opportunity to rejoin philanthropy was because of the Weingart Foundation's commitment to racial justice in a bold and unapologetic way. I've committed my life to working on issues of race and gender justice and so many other social justice issues. So it is such a privilege to be on this webinar as a proud member of the Cal Nonprofits Board, and someone who has come to philanthropy to be bold, to be courageous, to be revolutionary in how we do what we do. I intentionally have the background that I have up because I show up as my authentic, unapologetic Black woman self in every space that I'm in. And that's the message that I want to share from some of the conversations that are happening in philanthropy about how we move in this moment is we're looking for our grantee partners, community partners to continue to be in the spirit of what Ritu just shared, bold, authentic, unapologetic about who you are and what you do. One of the things I've heard, and I'm just going to share some nuggets from some different meetings and speakers and things that I've heard in philanthropic spaces, just to encourage you, to let you know that philanthropy, much of philanthropy is standing alongside you in this moment as social justice warriors, and are thinking about what we can do to be to pivot in the ways we need to be more effective in funding and working beyond the grant, right? There's so much work that can be done beyond just the grant making part of what we do. So just going to share a few thoughts as if you were a fly on the wall in some of the philanthropy discussions that have been going on. And the first I alluded to already is just this notion of we need both funders and our grantee partners to be bold and courageous. With courage and solidarity, we can make it through this challenging time. We have to know that, and we have to know that courage is contagious. So know that philanthropy is standing alongside, much of philanthropy is standing alongside you in that calling to be bold and courageous, and hopefully that courageousness will be contagious and really kind of push back some of the fear that just naturally would tend to attack us in this environment in which we find ourselves. I heard one of our funder colleagues say something pretty profound, and that was that we need to put resources, power, and relationships to work boldly in this moment and in this movement. And so many of us in philanthropy are looking at how we can do that even more effectively than we have in the past, and especially in response to the moment in which we find ourselves. We must work together to determine the collective action steps we are committed to and that we're calling folks to. So those are the conversations that are happening in philanthropy circles as we commit to the daily work of cultivating courage in our peers, both our philanthropic and our grantee partner peers. We have to create a permission structure for bold imagination in this season. We find ourselves in an unprecedented, unique scenario of attack, and we have to think boldly and think creatively and be open to doing things differently than we have in the past. There's a saying that I heard at the ABFE conference. I don't know if you all are familiar with ABFE, the Association of Black Foundation Executives, led by Susan Taylor Batten, which is one of the most activist organizations of the philanthropy serving organizations. And I'm so encouraged every time I go to the ABFE conference. But at the most recent conference, someone said that we must tell the truth in rooms where lives have been institutionalized. And that is what we as grant makers need to do as we push back on just the attacks that we're under, as well as we advance racial justice, as we dismantle white supremacy culture in all the ways that it manifests itself. We've got to tell the truth. And oftentimes that's hard, but many of us in philanthropy are committed to doing that alongside our grantee partners and other community partners. We have to recognize how we will work together in this new season. That's something that the ABFE audience was charged to think about by our leader. And we're looking at how do we move in nimble ways, in new ways, to really make an impact through the funding and other ways that we can have an impact on our community and on our grantee partners. For those of you who haven't yet seen, there was an article in the Nonprofit Quarterly on April 9th that is about philanthropy standing together in this moment. And so if you haven't seen that article, please do check it out. I think it will encourage you and just to see how bold and courageous philanthropy is endeavoring to be in this season. Another question that I heard in a recent philanthropy meeting that resonated with me is, are we looking to break people's chains? I'm sorry, let me get that right. Are we looking to loosen people's chains or free them from bondage? And in this season, the question becomes, how can we do more to free folks from bondage as opposed to just loosen their chains? Couple folks in the philanthropy community that are either currently working in philanthropy or previously worked in philanthropy that are colleagues of mine have some books out that I would highly recommend you check out if that will encourage you around kind of this bold and courageous and progressive philanthropic vision. And the first is Dimple Appi Jandani, She has a new book out called A New Era of Philanthropy, and the subtitle is 10 Practices to Transform Wealth into a More Just and Sustainable Future. Just came out and just has some tremendous insights in that book about how philanthropy needs to move in this season and move differently to be even more effective. And then the second book that is by Vanessa Daniel, and her book is entitled Unrig the Game: What Women of Color Can Teach Everyone About Winning. And Vanessa has been on a book tour, and I've gone to a couple of the sessions that she has had both online and in person. That book will also have some real gems for you around how we can move more effectively in this movement as philanthropy and grantee partners and community together. And then I'll give you a couple quotes as I transition and pass the mic to Felix, that I've heard Vanessa share that I thought were particularly reflective of how many of us are in philanthropy who are progressive and committed to social justice are thinking about this moment. And the first is to remember that power doesn't come from money, it comes from the people. Power doesn't come from money, it comes from people. The money's a tool, obviously, but we have to remember that this is all about empowering people and all about moving money into movements, right, as philanthropy. It's about the movement. We're just a tool to be able to help the movement thrive and be more effective. The other thing I've heard Vanessa say recently is that we need to convert flashpoint moments into sustained change. And I think that that's so accurate as many of us are thinking about how we can move in this season more powerfully, differently, be even more effective, is that how can we move money in ways that is going to create sustained change? So I would just, in closing, want to just encourage all of you in the spirit of what Ritu shared, be your authentic self. Funders are looking for you to be your authentic selves, and your organizations to be authentic in who you are and how you show up and the ways that you are impacting lives and communities and systems. We will navigate this challenging juncture we're in together, but don't shrink, be unapologetic, be revolutionary, and recognize that so many of us in philanthropy see you, affirm you, and please don't hesitate to share with us the unique challenges that you're having as you navigate the season that we're in. We're thought partners. Obviously, we have difficult decisions to make about where we're able to make grants and move money and where we might not be able to because of limited resources. But it's more than just the money, right? It's about how can we move together and be more effective in the work that we're all trying to push forward and the change we all would like to see. My role as senior director of strategic partnerships is all about thinking about how do we leverage our influence as a foundation in ways that can positively impact the communities we love and serve. So it's beyond the money, it's about solidarity, it's about us really working together and strategizing in new ways to be more effective, and to recognize something that I heard Angela Glover Blackwell, who I want to be when I grow up, founder of Policy Link, attorney like I am, and just so effective in so many ways. The reason that we're under attack, the progressive work that we care about so much is under attack, is because we were winning. We were winning, and that is what precipitated the intensified attack in the season that we find ourselves in. So we need to encourage ourselves, remind ourselves that we will get through this. We have been effective in our work. Obviously, much more work to do, but to celebrate our victories and to really remember the legacy and the shoulders on that we stand on. And I will just, in closing, say today is the anniversary of Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman speech, March 29th, 1851, where she asked the provocative question, ain't I a woman? As a Black woman, don't I get the same rights and privileges, and why don't I get the same rights and privileges as so many others? And so, as somebody who looks to Sojourner Truth as a role model and someone who I lift up and look to for inspiration in so many ways, I just thought it was particularly meaningful to me and particularly instructive that this webinar is happening on the um, anniversary of the Ain't I a Woman speech by Sojourner. So when you get discouraged, remember Sojourner, remember Fannie Lou, remember all the people who have passed the baton to us in this season to be able to, for us to run our leg of the race in this civil rights, social justice journey, and know that so many of us in philanthropy are there with you and partnering with you and excited to encourage you and be a thought partner with you, even if we may not be able to give you a grant, right? It's about much more than the money. As Vanessa says, this is about power is about the people, not about money. So thank you all for all you do. And for those of you who I don't know, look forward to meeting you at some point, if possible, or at least having a conversation and be a thought partner and encourager on this journey that we find ourselves. Thank you. And I'll pass the mic to Felix.
Crystal, appreciate that. That's a tough part to follow. I agree with absolutely everything you have said. And I really appreciate the spirit in which it's said, which is to try to emphasize the boldness and the courageousness and the necessity to go ahead and speak out. And I think Ritu did a really nice job of arguing that there's room to do that within the legal frameworks that we're facing, within the political frameworks that we're facing. And I know there are a lot of open questions around that. But if you take anything from this call, I hope it's that there's room, latitude, etc., to do what it is that you do and to continue to do that boldly. I'm going to try to bring us to some sort of a conclusion by focusing on communication, which is critical to all of this. So we can all sit on webinars like this, high five each other. We're all pretty similar in terms of our worldview, in terms of our interests, etc. But that does nothing to engage a broader audience or to ultimately apply political pressure one way or another. And it doesn't do very much, I think, to ultimately build our tent. And so the question is, how do we do that? And I'm going to speak a little bit to the deck we have, if you want to move forward one slide. But I want to speak a little bit more generally, and if you want to get into some of these specifics, I welcome follow-up and questions one-to-one. The first thing to recognize is obviously we're dealing with an awful lot of different things. So it's a target-rich environment. That's obviously by design, right? The whole flood the zone strategy that the administration has been using is designed to spread you thin, right? So I'm sure you could pick a whole host of things on this particular chart and say, I need to respond to that, right? It might be a policy idea, it might be an economic hardship that we're facing, could be a DEI specific particular piece. And the notion is that the thinner you get spread, the less effective your communication ultimately is. The other, I think, thing to remember is that it draws us into a fight generally around sort of process, structure, and protocol, as opposed to sort of impact, human impact. And I think it's easy for folks in the philanthropy space to lose sight of why we do the work and ultimately like what matters about the work. And you see this a bit, right? The question doesn't become whether or not it's important for us, for example, to deliver foreign aid from a humanitarian perspective. The debate very quickly becomes around whether or not USAID should be continued to exist in its current makeup or not, one way or another. That's a different argument than like whether the aid in the first place was important. And so we have to be careful both to be disciplined about where we're picking fights, where we want to get engaged, and then to make it about human impact. If we go forward a slide, it's important for us to think and to understand ourselves. And there are two slides here that both lay out some different sort of personas that might apply to any one of you on the call or any one of your colleagues, could be in your organization or people you work adjacent to. But it's important to understand sort of both the pros and cons of our makeup as individuals. And when we go and do campaign work, we think a lot about the audience. Who are we talking to and different personas on their end? But in crisis communications, especially in moments like this, it's important to understand ourselves and what triggers us one way or another. And I want to talk to a few of those particular pieces. The first is one of the weaknesses, I think, in the philanthropic sector is that we are all, in some ways, political insiders, right? We get up in the morning, we read the news, we're into the news, we know a huge amount of detail one way or another. And that makes us very, very different from the broader audience that while informed and generally engaged, isn't at this level, right? They don't know the same sorts of things. And so understanding like our need to act, our need to move on certain things, that there's maybe some pre-work that we need to do, and that really informs how you would think about crisis communication. I think the second piece is that we are generally fairly risk averse as a field, right? So right now you see this a lot in the foundation space where folks are saying, well, how about I go and hide? If I go into a hole, I can avoid the risk of being targeted, or I could avoid the risk of blowback. And there's sort of this notion that on the spectrum of risk, there's a risk on one end and no risk on the other, that there's a binary. But that's really not true. In my opinion, there's risk and risk, right? The risk of hiding is that you abandon decades worth of work and decades worth of progress, to Crystal's point, right? That you abandon your allies and the people who've been out in the field doing the hard work, especially if you're a funder, right? That you leave grantees hanging, folks that are dependent on your funding, depending on your participation, on your allyship, one way or another. And so this risk thing is, I think, an important thing for us to embrace. And for a group of people who are generally politically risk averse, you're going to have to run up a hill a little bit and convince folks, especially at the funder and larger funder level, to continue to engage and to engage rapidly. Someone called this earlier, saying in the chat, we're on fire now. Like, what do we need to do? And I think it's making noise around this idea that there's risk, and that to some extent the risk of hiding outweighs, I think, the risk of being outspoken and being in the field, especially in a moment of authoritarianism. The other piece about us that I think is important to remember is sort of the insular nature of our field, right? That we come up, we do the work immediately with people that we're impacting. We rarely tell the story of our impact. But there's broad, bipartisan, national consensus about the importance of the philanthropic sector, about the importance of 501c3 work, about the importance of the types of services that you all deliver, whether it's in the name of environmental protection, clean air, clean water, whether it's in the name of job security, economic security, could be pick your issue, but generally there's broad support for those particular thematics, even if in the moment the political analysis suggests that people are maybe moving away from that. And that brings me to the last thing that I think is really important to understand about ourselves, which is that it's very high risk, in my opinion, in a crisis communication situation to use political analysis to guide a philanthropic response, right? The political analysis works in a 2-year cycle. It's where the voters were, not today, but where they were in November. And that changes very rapidly. You all are working on horizons that are much longer in terms of time, right? My impact is over years, maybe decades, maybe it's over a 100-year period of time. And so it's important not to overweight the political analysis and the political learnings from an election to inform your work. And I think Crystal spoke to this really well, which is like, it's important to remember that both there is consent. It's possible for people to hold two feelings at the same time. I can be both very frustrated about inflation and want to vote for change, and I can hold it true that these values matter to me. And so we have to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I hope that gives folks sort of a sense of boldness. If you want to move forward a slide, Robert, we'll send these out. You can read through these, but somewhere you're going to lay somewhere on the spectrum, and maybe there's a persona that fits you better. But it's important to understand yourself, and then to once you understand yourself, your organization, your colleagues, to allow that to inform your crisis comms support. Go forward one more slide. So what are the goals of saying something out loud? Why do I want to do this? Why does it matter? First off, there's a credibility issue here, and you want to protect it. The Trump administration is working very hard to tear down the credibility of its perceived enemies, one way or another, right? They paint with a broad brush. There may be a nugget of truth here or there, but generally the idea is to discredit, right? It's to prove you guilty and then make you prove your innocence. And so your first task is to get out and protect yourself, your brand as an organization, the brand and credibility of your partner organizations, the credibility of your work. And you can do that in through human storytelling. Here's impact we're making in real time in communities. You can do that through data, obviously sharing data of your impact one way or another, and by connecting your work to things that the broader public already says it cares about. Most folks are feeling sort of the threat of economic instability acutely, and so if you work in spaces that can tie into that, tie into that. Most folks are feeling a loss of community. If you're doing some work that ties into community, say that aloud and protect credibility. The second is to build trust. And it's really important to understand here that there's science that underlies, social science that underlies what impactful campaigns are made of. And one of the things that frustrates me most at the moment is that we're spending all this time talking about what the message should be. What should the message be? And we spend almost no time talking about the messenger. The messenger is about 100 times more important than the message. if you know me personally and I tell you something about any topic, you're much, much more likely to believe whatever it is I tell you, whether it is true or not, whether it is accurate or not. The message itself is much less important than the messenger. And so y'all need to think a little bit about what makes people trust you. Are you aligned with their broad values? Are you aligned in terms of like who your community is and what the identity of that particular community is? Are you a trusted messenger one way or another? And so thinking as much about who we're talking to, whether we're values oriented, and who the messenger is as important as what the message is. And so in crisis, what we find a lot is there's a ton of navel gazing about what do we say, and it's much more important to think about who do we say it to and who's doing the saying. And so I encourage you to think about that quite a bit. And then obviously the third piece is to minimize damage and disruption. In this particular case, you can't minimize everything. So pick your spot and then figure out how you can get out ahead of it. Again, you can build allies, you can broaden your community. Somebody said, what do we do right now? If I was just to say, take a first step, it's lock arms, right? Try to broaden your community as best you can across issue spaces, across geography, across type of organization. Think about others that find themselves under pressure. It could be law firms, it could be universities or learning institutions of learning, anybody that's in a government type role, small businesses because of the tariffs. It's a pretty target-rich environment. There are a lot of different organizations there for you to lock arms with. If you go forward one more slide, Robert. And then the kind of principles of this particular work are to position yourself, right? Be clear about who you are, what you do, and repeat that again and again and again. I talked a little bit about the people, right? Both the roles and responsibilities of your team members, who's doing and saying what, and then who are the stakeholders that you need to engage. Ultimately, what are the personas of those kind of key stakeholders? And then lastly is plan, right? So right now, all of you can and should be planning for either a crisis that you think might be coming or an attack you might think might be coming. All of you should be thinking about some different variations. And here I would also caution you to not overthink it, right? Don't go down in the rabbit hole and do sort of paralysis by analysis, right? It's important to be prepared, but it's important not to be paralyzed by what you think is coming. And so again, like think through what your strategy is and what your response might be for each particular type of scenario that you think is likely to happen. And then if you have additional bandwidth, where do you join as an ally? How do you amplify and magnify what folks are saying? And so if we go forward a slide, obviously the way to do that is to think about like kind of a threat matrix. And this will be different for each of you one way or another. But, like level 1 threats, which are like short term, maybe impacted day to day, don't waste time on that. Level 4 threats, spend time on preparing for those particular things, right? Like focus your resources where they are likely to be most needed or where the impact might be the biggest. Level 2 and 3, this is going to be kind of a variable for different organizations. Again, most of you shouldn't find yourselves under direct attack. You will be finding yourself under what I sort of say is like, it's like a barnacle attack. You're sort of attached to the whale one way or another, and the whale gets attacked, and then by virtue of that, you're hurt. So what do you do in those scenarios? How do you show up, or how do you sort of align in some different ways? So a threat matrix is a really important way to force discipline on yourself and your organization to not overthink the situation, but to be prepared. Then if we go forward one more, there's also a public response matrix, right? Which is sort of, where are we in these particular boxes? And then can that help me determine your response one way or another? And so, again, I don't want to go too far into each of these particular pieces. I'm happy to do this offline with you if it's interesting. But there are tools you can use. The key piece of this, I think, is that you don't go quiet. To build on what Crystal and Ritu are saying, is like keep doing the work you're doing. Have faith that there are folks out there, lots of folks that are aligned with what you're doing, and then prepare yourself to respond if necessary. But more than anything, connect everything you do back to human impact. In the absence of that, people just don't care about what it is and they don't line up behind you. If we go forward, there's another 2 slides here, which just kind of quickly, like one, there's some grounding questions you can use to help guide you. And then if we go forward one more slide, and you're going to get all these slides, there's also a checklist that you can work through as you're sort of thinking through, like, what do we communicate about or otherwise. I'm using the word crisis because that's the moment we're in. It feels like a crisis. It is a crisis in a real way, but this could just as easily be like your communications checklist and sort of your PR checklist, if you will. Last thing I want to say, and then I'll hand it over for questions, is we often get asked like, we're not very big. We don't have a communications director. What do we like? Does anyone care about what we're doing? Does this have to be press releases? As a final thought, I want to encourage you to think about communications broadly. most of you at this point are probably following someone or something on social media. A whole bunch of you probably today or tomorrow or over the next couple of days are going to watch a video of some kind somewhere that someone shot on an iPhone. You're going to see a billboard. You're going to see there's communication is all around you in all of its different forms. You might sit on a panel the way we are right now. Think about communications broadly. Lend your voice wherever you can. Don't overthink the ideal forum or whether it's in a traditional stream. Make noise. A make noise can be, I'm liking this particular thing, I'm commenting on something. Um, all of those particular things matter because they, in aggregate, in total, they add to the volume of what's out there. And I think that very much builds on what Ritu and Crystal said at the beginning of the call, which is like continue to know where the boundaries are, where your risk is, and then do the work. And then understand that there's a whole community out there that's eager to stand side by side with you and one that would welcome you standing side by side with them. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jeff and Robert.
Thanks so much, Felix. And thanks so much to all of our other panelists. Wow, what a fantastic presentation and discussion we have had so far. I'm so inspired by the words that I've heard today, and I'd like to take a minute to address some of the questions that we see in the Q&A box. So I'll invite our panelists to come back on screen, and I'll be asking the questions that have been upvoted by our participants. And I'll start with one from Michelle. And Michelle says, I love the foundation's approach to thinking about how to be more effective in your advocacy, speaking up, being brave. I am desperate to hear the word urgent. What are the actions you will take today, this week, next week? I ask because I am looking for these actions myself for today and for my organization when they feel safe. And I'll let our panelists jump in to speak to that question as they feel fit.
I think I'll just chime in and say, you know, as philanthropy, we always want to be very respectful of knowing that it's the work of our grantees that we're amplifying and their voices that we're amplifying primarily, so that we don't ever get ahead of necessarily what messaging and leadership that the folks who are the experts who are on the ground on the front lines doing the work, what they would want to say and share. But in terms of coming alongside organizations and addressing urgent issues when it's appropriate. The letter I gave you, I think somebody put the link in the chat, that philanthropy organizations that came together to talk about standing in solidarity in advance and being able to support folks as we deal with these challenging times we're living in. It's all about needing to be strategic and speak together and speak with an urgency and a voice. So if that didn't come through, the urgency piece of this is absolutely critical. And I'm actually organized. As I talk to you all, I've got emails I'm waiting to get back about meetings with people in philanthropy that I'm organizing to have conversations about what that kind of urgent action, speaking, funding, all of the tools in the toolkits, right? All the things that we have at our disposal, how those can be deployed.
Thanks so much, Crystal. I have another question here that speaks broadly to some of the concerns that I imagine many of our registrants and attendees are thinking about. And it says, how is the administration targeting nonprofits based on their missions, e.g. climate change, environmental justice, conservation, etc.?
I can try to answer. I mean, so I think the first form of targeting came with the orders, right? The executive orders that specifically call out nonprofits that are engaged in equity programming, but also nonprofits engaged in gender justice and environmental justice, essentially saying that, you know, any federal government agencies that are advancing that kind of work are to be shut down, and you know, federal funding that goes to nonprofits that engage in that work needs to be examined and potentially terminated. At this point, I haven't seen, you know, the administration opening up investigations as to like community-based nonprofits that engage in this work. I have seen people get letters basically saying your federal contract is being terminated, or we need to amend it to include new language, or we need you to certify that you're not using the federal money that we're giving you to engage in unlawful XYZ, but not defining what that is. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think that's how I primarily am seeing it. I don't know if the other panelists have a different perspective.
Any other thoughts from our panelists on that question? Otherwise, I'd be happy to move along. All right, we have one here from Colleen. And I think the answer here is something that we can hammer down on. The question is, how effective protective is changing website language when archives and things like the Wayback Machine could still be used? And I think this registrant is speaking about scrubbing their website of potentially inflammatory or upsetting language to the current administration. So if we could talk for a minute about that topic and what advice we might give to folks who are thinking about this.
Yeah, I'll just start briefly. I mean, it's a good point, right? Like things that are on the internet, there's different ways to find out things. There's different prior versions that people can look up. Has a long life once it's on the internet. I also think what we're seeing, and I totally understand the inclination to try to look at websites and sort of make changes and try not to be a target, but right now it's like any word could make us a target, right? Like there's no safe words anymore. The words that we thought were safe are not safe. And like I just feel like, as I mentioned, playing it safe is not gonna really work for us. We're seeing that, as you all have seen, the organizations that really bent a knee to the administration continue to be bullied. The administration is asking more of them. And I do understand that the nonprofits that really rely on federal funding, they're in a very tough situation, because they can't risk losing that federal funding. And so they're doing everything they can to try to maintain it. I think it's just a very tricky situation because you might do all these things and it's still gonna get terminated at the end of the day because I feel like the administration kind of knows who they want to go after and regardless of what you do.
Yeah, I want to build on that for a second. I agree with that completely. And I think the bullying analogy is the appropriate one, which is the firms that have, law firms or others that have tried to acquiesce or the university that have tried to acquiesce, I think have found that the deck chairs just kind of keep moving, right? That there actually is no deal to be had that is actually permanent or lasting in any way. And that's been true in tariffs. I mean, pick your issue set. I think the other piece is that you can't validate the attack. I think when we start scrubbing and start eliminating language or start going to a place that suggests that maybe the administration is right in its thesis, right, that these things are bad or damaging or otherwise, you sort of validate the thesis. And again, I think if you sit where we sit with the amount of information we process, you can sort of assume, well, people understand better. Don't assume that, right? Like most folks aren't engaging with this on the day to day in the same way we are. And so the scrubbing gets the attention, but what you do next doesn't. So be careful that like you don't roll back something you spent an awful lot of time putting out into the world, gaining traction on, building audience around, etc. That doesn't mean you can't iterate, you can't build on it, but don't assume that folks are going to pay attention to it the same way you do. So I think scrub comes with real risk. The other piece that I think is important also to understand is where folks are getting information from, right? So most of them aren't engaging in this conversation on your website. Like they're going to engage in this conversation on social media or within their feeds one way or another. It's really important for you to have a presence there and to continue to make an argument for why the policies you've been advancing, the ideas you've been advancing continue to matter to them. And I think, there's a sort of sense that like, well, if we're just quiet, it'll go away. No, if we're quiet, it'll roll away. It'll roll the other way. And it's important to kind of hold on to that, I think, as you go forward.
Great, thanks so much. We have time for just a couple of more questions. And one that I see as being upvoted in the Q&A is, can we please elaborate on false claims, acts, or lawsuits? I know this is a big question, but if that speaks to any of our panelists, please feel free to jump in here.
Yes. So, I'm trying to figure out where to start. So obviously, it's a scary thing, right? To feel that if you get federal funding, the administration may try to claim that, um, you are using federal funds for illegal purposes, or that you certified in writing that you're not going to be using the funds for illegal purposes, and then it's later found that you are, and they bring a claim under the False Claims Act, which can come with all sorts of penalties. So that is something the administration has said that they're going to pursue. And I think just last week they opened some new office to kind of look into False Claims Acts cases and basically encourage private people to also speak up about if they think an entity is using federal funds for an illegal purpose. So it is something to know about and to keep in mind, but at the same time, um I don't know like what's going to come of it. Like if it's just something being thrown out there to scare people, or if they're actually going to move on it. And if they do move on it, are they going to go after again like these bigger entities that they're trying to make an example of to again scare, smaller nonprofits? Um that's all I can really say about it right now. It is something to be aware of. I think that if you're getting those kind of certification letters and you're not sure how to respond, again, please reach out to public counsel. We can give you some advice. And as many of you know, those letters just say like certify that you're not engaging in unlawful XYZ, but they're not defining what unlawful is. So a lot of people that are responding to them are saying, to my knowledge, I'm not engaging in any illegal activities, but it's yet to come, like what's going to come of all this. And again, so far the courts that are analyzing these executive orders, the ones related to DEI, they're by far finding that the orders violate the Constitution, that, that the administration has engaged in overreach, that they're engaged in viewpoint discrimination, that there's been no due process. So it's possible that even with the False Claims Act case, like the courts would find similarly.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Ritu.
I appreciate that,
Go
Ritu.
ahead.
I think what you said, and actually to the prior question too, it's just important to remember that the federal government, even as massive as it is, doesn't have the power to actually police this on an entity by entity basis. And that's part of the whole strategy here is obviously if they can scare people into self-policing of whatever, whether we're talking language, we're talking immigration, whatever we're talking about. So that's clearly part of it. I think there's also the executive order, and I didn't mention, I don't know, Ritu, I think you mentioned it in your slide, the one that actually set a deadline for agencies to identify up to 9 projects or entities to launch investigations of. It was part of the anti-DEI early EOs, and that deadline I believe is just passed. And so as far as the question about what are we going to see in targeting individuals, at this point it's largely been musings and sort of vaguely veiled threats. Does that change? Obviously we don't know yet, but a lot of what we're talking about here is just preparing folks so that if that were to change, that folks are as ready as they can be.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're at 17 past the hour. So I'd like to offer a very heartfelt thank you to our panelists. This group of experts offered just an incredible, wide-ranging breadth of expertise. And I'm just so thrilled to have them join us today to address this really critical topic. So thank you so much, Ritu, Crystal, and Felix. Your voices are instrumental in helping us navigate these challenging times. And we're so grateful for you to share your expertise with our community. I also want to thank everyone for attending. It's really wonderful to see everyone participating in the chat. It gives me great inspiration and courage to see everyone engaging and speaking to one another and uplifting each other. It's webinars like these and opportunities to connect with the nonprofit community that we really strive to produce. And so please stay tuned for more educational events and more webinars like these in our Trump 2.0 Resilience series. We are stronger together, and we can work as a sector to combat the attacks that are coming against us. So I really want to thank everyone for joining and for participating and for staying strong, linking arms, and facing these challenges together. And with that, I'd also like to highlight a couple of upcoming events. On Wednesday, June 11th, we have the 2025 Nonprofit Compensation Survey industry trends and salary data. This is an annual webinar that we put on, and it is always well attended. And so I'd encourage you to sign up for that webinar on our registration page at countnonprofits.com. And on Thursday, June 26th at 11 a.m., another capacity building webinar, Tax Issues for Nonprofits, Common Mistakes to Avoid. This is another one of our annual webinars. These are available to members. And as part of your membership fee, you never have to pay for these types of webinars. So a little bit of a membership plug here. These events we find are very helpful for nonprofits in navigating some of the more challenging administrative aspects. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining. I wish you a very wonderful afternoon. Take care and look after one another. Bye-bye.